Okay, so as we mentioned, Daniel, there's some progress being made on this new spending package. They're calling it an infrastructure package. Lots of other things in there as well, it seems. In your experience and looking at different similar packages in the past, what is the most similar to this? So you can go globally if you like. What's the most similar you've seen and what were the results?
We can identify significant elements of similarity with, for example, the Juncker Plan in the European Union that was launched in 2014, or the infrastructure plan that the Japanese government implemented after the real estate bubble burst at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. The reality of both plans was that the effect on jobs and growth was extremely poor. If we look, for example, at the Juncker plan, it mobilized more than $400 billion of investments and generated in the period of 5 years, according to the European Union, little more than 0.9% of growth above the base case. No? So very little, actually. And if we look at the Biden plan, the biggest problem I have with it is that it's not an infrastructure plan. Is that less than 6% of the plan, yeah, around 6%, in fact, is true infrastructure. The majority are different packages of current spending that have very little to no economic real return. So even in the estimates of the Biden administration, the impact on jobs and growth is negligible relative to the history of the recoveries. So that's the concern. The concern is that these packages are becoming larger and larger. And when they don't deliver, which they usually don't, because the misallocation of capital is very evident, then what governments come back to say is that it wasn't enough and that they need to do more.
And is it actually important to put it to productive use? Say, for example, there's so many trillion going on social programs or going on this or that. Is it not money in the economy anyway? Will it not stimulate the economy anyway?
Not necessarily. Many of the entitlement programs uh, don't have a real economic return and don't generate the tools to allow people to improve their position. Simply, they subsidize poverty, no, and they generate more a level of clientele rather than uh, real elements that help people stand on their feet and recover properly. I think that one of the big problems as well is that the historically, for example, if you built a big dam, or if you built something that had a history of utilization that was strong, well, you can see that that generates a return that is multiple times over what was initially spent. The problem in most of these investment packages is that first, they're not real investments. Second, is that most of those would be implemented by the private sector in an environment of extremely low rates and high liquidity. There is ample interest from investors to look at opportunities in infrastructure. Infrastructure is absolutely red hot in terms of investor interest. Therefore, usually what happens is that these programs tend to be directed towards things that governments find interesting politically, but that generate very little return. And the history of the chain of stimulus packages seen in the Eurozone and seen in Japan, and also, for example, you can also say that very large stimulus packages in China have weakened the level of productive growth of the economy because they're basically spent on creating phantom cities and overcapacity.
So, on that point, what are some of the long term risks to the economy of these packages? Or is it, it's better to spend it and give it a shot anyway? There's no real risk.
Yeah, that is a good point because many people say, well, maybe it's malinvestment, but who cares? Something has been built. And you spend it anyway. To start with, because you're spending it with debt, and you're spending it with debt that is going to be monetized, therefore, that will erode the purchasing power of the currency. But it's also that these plans, they generate a much weaker economy, a much less productive economy, and more importantly, all of that spending generates afterwards a big increase in taxes. So it reduces the potential of the economy to generate real productive investment and real productive job creation. I'm not saying that infrastructure is a bad thing as an investment. I am saying that in an environment in which, if there's anything out there in which private equity, investment funds, quoted companies are finding it difficult to get enough projects for all the capital that they want to deploy in infrastructure. It is surprising, to say the least, to believe that it has to come from government spending. And more importantly, that it has to come from government spending directed towards renewable energy and clean energy. For God's sake, there is not a single project in renewable right now that is not being chased by capital all over the world. So my point is that when governments interfere in this process, knowing that sometimes, some of those projects that are undertaken by the private sector may actually fail. But what is absolutely critical to understand is that when it's directed by government, the likelihood of a large percentage, if not the totality, to fail is enormous, because the incentive of government to malinvest is enormous and the penalization for doing it is inexistent. More importantly, they always pass the bill to the consumer or the taxpayer. So if a company may make a mistake in investment in infrastructure, that is something that they will have to address by being more prudent, by being more efficient, and obviously by placing enough provisions in their balance sheet in order to address that mistake. The government just passes the bill to the taxpayer.
Are you expecting taxes to go up over the next 5 to 10 years to pay for all this?
No, I'm expecting taxes to go up in the next 5 years and not pay for any of this. That's my problem. That is the problem. The problem is that the message that we get from the government inclined media is that taxes have to be increased in order to pay for the stimulus, but they don't pay the stimulus. Even in the best case scenario of revenue generation that we see in some of the estimates, absolutely science fiction estimates of tax revenue collection, the deficit is going to balloon anyhow.
Daniel Lacalle, Tresses, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your comments below, and keep defending freedom. Thank you very much.